In the grand halls of Ashford Manor, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows upon marble floors, a young maid named Rosalind carried secrets that could topple empires. For 3 years, she had scrubbed floors and polished silver, invisible to those who wielded power. But on this frost-laden morning in 1818, as Duke Nathaniel Ashford raised his hand to strike her for a spilled teacup, she reached into her apron and withdrew a crimson seal bearing the royal crest. The Duke's face drained of colour. His knees buckled, and in that breathless moment every servant in the corridor froze, for they had just witnessed the impossible. Their master, the most powerful man in 3 counties, kneeling before a maid. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. The morning light filtered through the towering windows of Ashford Manor, casting long rectangles of pale gold across the servants' corridor. Rosalind pressed her back against the cold stone wall, balancing a silver tray laden with the Duke's breakfast. Her fingers, reddened from years of lye soap and scalding water, gripped the handles with practiced steadiness. At 19, she had learned to make herself small, to move through the grand estate like a whisper, unheard and unseen. The manor itself was a monument to wealth and lineage. Built during the reign of Queen Anne, its limestone facade rose 4 stories above manicured gardens that stretched toward the horizon. Inside, every surface gleamed with the labor of 24 servants who rose before dawn and retired long after the family had taken to their beds. Rosalind had arrived here 3 years ago, sent by her widowed mother, who could no longer afford to feed another mouth. The position had been presented as an opportunity, a chance to serve one of England's most distinguished families. Duke Nathaniel Ashford was 32 years old and considered one of the most eligible men in the realm. His family had held their title for 6 generations, accumulating land and influence through strategic marriages and ruthless business dealings. He was tall and striking, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in carefully arranged waves, and eyes the color of winter ice. Society matrons praised his refinement. Young ladies blushed when he entered a room, but the servants knew a different man. Rosalind had learned quickly to avoid his attention. She kept her auburn hair pinned tightly beneath her cap, her eyes downcast, her movements efficient and silent. She had watched other maids dismissed for imagined infractions, their references destroyed, their futures ruined. The Duke's temper was legendary below stairs, though he maintained perfect composure in polite society. This morning, as she entered his private study with the breakfast tray, she found him standing by the window, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. A letter lay crumpled on his desk, the wax seal broken. He did not acknowledge her entrance, and she moved with careful precision to set the tray upon the side table. The china clinked softly, a sound that seemed thunderous in the tense silence. "Your Grace," she murmured, preparing to withdraw. "Wait." His voice was sharp as broken glass. Rosalind froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done nothing wrong, she was certain of it. The tea was prepared exactly as he preferred. The toast cut into precise triangles, the jam in its crystal dish positioned just so. The Duke turned from the window, his handsome features twisted with displeasure. "Do you know what this letter contains?" He gestured toward the crumpled paper. "The Crown has denied my petition for additional lands, denied me, as if I were some common merchant begging for scraps." She remained silent, knowing that any response would be dangerous. His moods were unpredictable, his pride easily wounded. 3 generations my family has served the Crown," he continued, his voice rising. "We have given our wealth, our loyalty, our very blood, and this is how we are repaid, with dismissal, with disrespect." Rosalind kept her eyes fixed on the Persian carpet beneath her feet, counting the intricate patterns in the weave. She had learned this technique from Mrs. Pemberton, the head housekeeper, who had served the Ashford family for 30 years. "Make yourself a statue," the older woman had advised. Stone does not provoke. Stone does not react. But on this morning, her stillness was not enough. The Duke's anger needed a target, and she was the only one present. He moved toward her with sudden violence, and she instinctively stepped backward, her heel catching on the edge of the carpet. The movement was slight, barely perceptible, but it caused her elbow to brush against the breakfast tray. The teacup rattled in its saucer. Clumsy fool! The Duke's hand rose, and Rosalind saw her future flash before her eyes. Dismissal, disgrace, her mother's cottage lost, her younger sister forced into service, or worse. But something inside her, something that had been compressed and silenced for 3 long years, suddenly ignited. Her hand moved to the hidden pocket sewn into her apron, her fingers closing around the object she had carried every day since her arrival at Ashford Manor. The object her mother had pressed into her palm on that final morning, with tears streaming down her weathered face and words that had made no sense at the time. "If you are ever in mortal danger," her mother had whispered, "show this, only this, and speak the words I taught you." Rosalind withdrew the seal. It was small, no larger than a sovereign, made of gold and crimson enamel. The royal crest was unmistakable, the lion and unicorn rendered in exquisite detail. But it was the inscription around the edge that held true power, words in Latin that proclaimed the bearer under the personal protection of the crown. "Silence!" her voice rang out, clear and commanding, a tone she had never used in her life. "By order of His Majesty King George IV, I command you to halt." The Duke's hand froze in mid-air. His eyes fixed on the seal, and the colour drained from his face as if he had seen a spectre. For a long moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, impossibly, the Duke's knees bent. He sank to the floor before her, his head bowed, his entire body trembling. In the doorway a footman stood frozen, his mouth agape. From the corridor beyond came the sound of hurried footsteps as other servants rushed to witness the impossible scene. Rosalind stood above the kneeling Duke, the royal seal gleaming in her palm, and felt the foundations of her carefully constructed world begin to crack and shift beneath her feet. The news spread through Ashford Manor like wildfire through dry timber. Within an hour, every servant from the scullery maid to the head butler knew that Rosalind, the quiet girl who scrubbed floors and emptied chamber pots, had brought the Duke to his knees with a royal seal. Within 2 hours, the story had reached the village, embellished with each retelling until it took on mythical proportions. By afternoon, carriages began arriving at the manor gates, bearing curious members of the aristocracy who had heard whispers of an extraordinary scandal. Rosalind sat in Mrs. Pemberton's small office, the seal still clutched in her trembling hand. The housekeeper paced before the fireplace, her usually composed face lined with worry and wonder. "Your mother never explained?" Mrs. Pemberton asked for the 3rd time. "Never. She only said to keep it hidden, to show it only if my life was threatened." Rosalind's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand what it means. I don't understand why the Duke reacted as he did. That seal, child, is no ordinary token. It bears the King's personal mark, which means you are under royal protection. But more than that..." The housekeeper paused, choosing her words carefully. "It means you are connected to the crown in some way. Perhaps your mother served the royal household. Perhaps there is noble blood in your veins. Whatever the truth, you have just declared yourself untouchable to one of the most powerful men in England." Before Rosalind could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. A young footman entered, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Mrs. Pemberton, the Duke requests Miss Rosalind's presence in the main drawing-room, immediately. There are visitors." Rosalind's stomach clenched. "I cannot. I am not dressed for—" "You will go as you are," Mrs. Pemberton interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "You have already shattered every rule of propriety. Your maid's uniform is the least of anyone's concerns now." She placed a firm hand on Rosalind's shoulder. "Hold your head high, girl. You have done nothing wrong. Remember that." The walk from the servants' quarters to the main drawing-room felt like a journey to the gallows. Rosalind's legs trembled beneath her simple grey dress, and her cap felt suddenly ridiculous, a symbol of her lowly status that now seemed absurdly out of place. As she approached the drawing-room doors, she could hear voices within, the cultured tones of the aristocracy engaged in animated conversation. The footman opened the doors, and silence fell like a curtain. Rosalind stepped into a room filled with perhaps 20 people, all dressed in the finest silks and woolens, all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to fascination to barely concealed contempt. The Duke stood by the fireplace, his face a mask of rigid control, though his hands trembled slightly as they gripped the mantelpiece. Beside him stood a woman Rosalind recognized as Lady Charlotte Pembroke, the Duke's intended bride. She was beautiful in the way of expensive porcelain, with pale blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls and a dress of emerald silk that probably cost more than Rosalind's mother earned in 5 years. Her blue eyes glittered with malice as she surveyed the maid who had humiliated her future husband. "So this is the creature," Lady Charlotte said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This common servant who dares to wield symbols she cannot possibly understand." An older gentleman stepped forward, his bearing military and his expression stern. "Miss Rosalind, I am Colonel Sir Edmund Hartley, magistrate of this county. I have been summoned to investigate this matter. You will present the seal you displayed to His Grace this morning." Rosalind's hand shook as she extended the seal. The colonel took it, examining it closely beneath the light streaming through the tall windows. His eyebrows rose, and he turned to confer in low tones with another gentleman, this one dressed in the sombre black of a royal solicitor. "This is genuine," the solicitor announced, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "The seal bears the king's personal cipher, issued during the Regency period. It grants the bearer protection from harm and guarantees safe passage throughout the realm. Such seals are exceedingly rare, given only to those who have rendered extraordinary service to the crown or to—" He paused, his eyes meeting Rosalind's with new interest. "Or to those of royal blood who must be protected while living in obscurity." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Lady Charlotte's face flushed an ugly crimson. "This is absurd. She is a maid. Look at her hands, her dress. She is nobody." "The seal does not lie, Lady Charlotte," the colonel said firmly. "Whatever Miss Rosalind's current circumstances, she is under the king's protection. Any harm done to her would be considered an act against the crown itself." He turned to the Duke, his expression grave. "Your Grace, you are fortunate that Miss Rosalind chose mercy. Had she reported your attempted assault to the authorities, you could have faced charges of treason." The Duke's face had gone from pale to grey. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally managed, "I did not know. I had no idea of her status." "Ignorance is no defense," the solicitor interjected. "However, as no actual harm was done and Miss Rosalind has not filed a formal complaint, we may consider this matter delicate rather than criminal." Rosalind found her voice, though it emerged smaller than she intended. "I want no trouble. I only wish to understand. My mother gave me this seal, but she never explained its significance. I do not know why I possess it, or what it means about my birth." The solicitor and the colonel exchanged meaningful glances. "That, Miss Rosalind, will require investigation. In the meantime, you cannot remain in service here. It would be entirely inappropriate for someone under royal protection to work as a servant. You will need to be relocated to suitable accommodations while we research your lineage." "She will go nowhere." Lady Charlotte's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "This is clearly a fraud, a scheme concocted by a clever servant to escape her station. I demand she be arrested for impersonation and theft." "You demand?" The colonel's voice turned icy. "Lady Charlotte, you forget yourself. You have no authority in this matter. The seal is genuine, verified by both myself and Mr. Blackwood here, who serves as the king's own solicitor for the northern counties. Unless you wish to question His Majesty's judgment, I suggest you moderate your tone." Lady Charlotte's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She turned to the Duke, clearly expecting him to defend her, but he remained frozen, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the window, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. An elderly woman rose from a chair near the fire, her movements elegant despite her age. She was dressed in deep purple, with silver hair arranged in a style that spoke of an earlier era. "I believe I may offer a solution," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I am Lady Agatha Thornbury, and I knew Rosalind's mother many years ago when she served in the royal household at Windsor. If the girl requires suitable accommodation and guidance while her situation is investigated, she may come to stay with me in London. I have a house in Mayfair, and I am in need of companionship." Rosalind's head spun. Her mother had served at Windsor. She had never mentioned such a thing, had always claimed to be the daughter of a country vicar, married to a soldier who died in the wars. The colonel nodded approvingly. "An excellent suggestion, Lady Agatha. Miss Rosalind, do you accept this arrangement?" What choice did she have? To remain at Ashford Manor was impossible. To return to her mother's cottage would bring shame and questions she could not answer. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I accept." "Then it is settled." The colonel turned to the assembled company. "I trust everyone present understands that this matter is to be treated with the utmost discretion. Gossip would serve no one, least of all His Grace, whose reputation has already been compromised by this incident." As the gathering began to disperse, Rosalind caught Lady Charlotte's eye. The hatred there was palpable, a living thing that promised future vengeance. The Duke finally moved, crossing the room to stand before Rosalind. He did not meet her eyes. "I apologize," he said stiffly, the words clearly costing him dearly. "I acted in ignorance and anger. It will not happen again." Rosalind said nothing. There was nothing to say. The man who had held absolute power over her life just hours ago now stood diminished, brought low by a secret she herself did not understand. As she followed Lady Agatha from the room, she glanced back once at the Duke and his beautiful, furious fiancée. They stood together by the fireplace, two figures of privilege and power, and yet in that moment they seemed smaller than she had ever imagined possible. The journey to London took 2 days by coach, and Rosalind spent most of it in stunned silence, watching the countryside roll past the window while Lady Agatha dozed across from her. The elderly woman had said little beyond practical arrangements, but her presence was oddly comforting. There was a sharpness to her eyes that suggested a keen intelligence and a warmth in her occasional smiles that Rosalind had rarely encountered among the upper classes. Lady Agatha's London residence was a graceful townhouse on a quiet Mayfair street, its white stone facade elegant without being ostentatious. Inside, the rooms were furnished with exquisite taste, filled with books and paintings and comfortable chairs that invited conversation. The staff, a small household of 6, greeted Rosalind without the disdain she had expected. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Davies, showed her to a bedroom on the 2nd floor that was larger than the entire cottage where she had grown up. "Lady Agatha has instructed that you are to be treated as a guest, not a servant," Mrs. Davies explained, her Welsh accent soft and musical. "You'll take your meals with her ladyship, and you're free to use the library and drawing room as you please. She asks only that you join her for tea each afternoon at 4. That first afternoon, Rosalind descended to the drawing room with her heart hammering. She had changed from her maid's uniform into a simple day dress that Lady Agatha had provided, a soft blue muslin that fit reasonably well despite being slightly too large. Her hair, freed from its severe cap, fell in auburn waves past her shoulders, and she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she had not experienced since childhood. Lady Agatha was already seated by the fire, a tea service laid out on the table before her. She gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit, child. We have much to discuss, and I prefer to do so without the weight of unanswered questions hanging between us." Rosalind sat, accepting a cup of tea with trembling hands. "You said you knew my mother." "I did. Margaret was one of the finest ladies' maids at Windsor, in service to Princess Charlotte before her tragic death in childbirth. Your mother was intelligent, discreet, and utterly loyal. She was also very beautiful, with the same auburn hair and green eyes that you possess." Lady Agatha paused, sipping her tea thoughtfully. "She left royal service rather suddenly in 1799, shortly after a particular scandal involving a minor prince and a young woman of unsuitable birth. Nothing was ever proven, but there were whispers. And then Margaret disappeared into the countryside, married to a soldier, or so the story went." Rosalind's cup rattled in its saucer. "Are you suggesting that that my father was—" "I am suggesting nothing. I am stating facts and allowing you to draw your own conclusions. The royal seal you carry is not given lightly. It is a promise of protection, yes, but also an acknowledgement of blood, of obligation, of secrets that must be kept for the good of the realm." Lady Agatha's eyes were kind but unflinching. "Your mother protected you by keeping you in obscurity. But now that protection has been revealed, and you cannot return to the life you knew, you must learn to navigate a new world, one that will view you with curiosity, suspicion, and in some cases, hostility." "I don't know how," Rosalind whispered. "I can barely read beyond simple words. I know nothing of society, of proper behavior. I will be exposed as a fraud within days. Then we shall educate you." Lady Agatha set down her cup with a decisive click. "I have 3 months before the season begins in earnest. In that time, we will transform you from a maid into a young woman of refinement. You will learn to read and write fluently, to speak French, to dance, to manage a household. You will learn which fork to use and how to deflect an insult with grace. And most importantly, you will learn that your worth is not determined by your birth or your circumstances, but by your character and your choices." Over the following weeks, Rosalind's days fell into a rigorous pattern. Mornings were devoted to reading and writing, under the tutelage of Mr. Pemberton, a retired schoolmaster with infinite patience and a gift for making literature come alive. Afternoons brought lessons in deportment, music, and French from a succession of tutors who treated her with varying degrees of skepticism and respect. Evenings were spent with Lady Agatha, discussing everything from politics to philosophy, conversations that challenged Rosalind's mind in ways she had never imagined possible. She discovered that she had a natural aptitude for learning. The intelligence that had been suppressed during her years in service now flourished, fed by books and ideas and the freedom to ask questions. She devoured novels by Austen and Scott, poetry by Byron and Wordsworth. She learned that the world was far larger and more complex than the narrow confines of Ashford Manor had suggested. One crisp March afternoon, Lady Agatha announced that they would be attending a lecture at the Royal Institution. "It is time you began to venture into society," she explained. "Not the grand balls and dinners yet, but intellectual gatherings where your mind will be valued more than your pedigree." The lecture hall was filled with perhaps 100 people, a mix of scholars, physicians, and curious members of the educated classes. The speaker was a young doctor named Elias Reed, recently returned from studying in Edinburgh. He spoke about advances in surgical techniques, his passion for his subject evident in every word. Rosalind found herself leaning forward, fascinated not just by the content, but by the speaker himself. Dr. Reed was perhaps 30, tall and lean, with dark hair that refused to stay properly combed, and eyes that burned with intelligence and compassion. He spoke without condescension, making complex medical concepts accessible to his diverse audience. When he finished, the applause was enthusiastic, and several people crowded forward to ask questions. Lady Agatha guided Rosalind through the crowd. "Dr. Reed is the son of a country physician, educated through scholarships and his own determination. He has no title, no fortune, but he is respected throughout London for his skill and his dedication to treating the poor as well as the wealthy. I thought you might find his story inspiring." They were introduced in the corridor outside the lecture hall. Dr. Reed's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. "Lady Agatha, a pleasure as always. And Miss Rosalind," she managed, acutely aware of her own nervousness. "Just Rosalind." His eyebrows rose slightly at the lack of surname, but he did not press. "Did you enjoy the lecture, Miss Rosalind?" "Very much. Though I confess some of the anatomical details were beyond my understanding. I have had little formal education." "Formal education is overrated," he said with a grin. "Some of the most brilliant minds I know learned from life rather than books, though books certainly help." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Rosalind felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with medical science. Over the following weeks, they encountered Dr. Reed at several more lectures and gatherings. He always made a point of speaking with Rosalind, asking her opinions, recommending books, treating her as an intellectual equal rather than a curiosity. Lady Agatha watched these interactions with approval and something that might have been amusement. "He is a good man," she remarked one evening after they had returned from a discussion on social reform. "Intelligent, principled, and utterly unimpressed by titles and wealth. Quite different from the Duke, wouldn't you say?" Rosalind felt her cheeks warm. "I am not looking for. I have no expectations of." "Of course not," Lady Agatha said smoothly. "But it does no harm to recognize that there are men in this world who value a woman's mind and character above her connections. Should you ever wish to pursue such an acquaintance, you would have my full support." That night, lying in her comfortable bed in the quiet Mayfair townhouse, Rosalind allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she had always assumed. Not a return to service, not a lonely spinsterhood in her mother's cottage, but something entirely new. A life of purpose and learning, perhaps even a partnership with someone who saw her as she truly was. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, a door opening onto possibilities she had never dared to consider. Spring arrived in London with a burst of colour and energy. The season began in earnest, and Mayfair filled with carriages bearing aristocratic families from their country estates. Lady Agatha declared that Rosalind was ready to make her formal debut into society, though not in the traditional manner of a debutante seeking a husband. "We shall attend Lady Westbrook's charity gala," she announced. "It is a gathering of intellectuals and reformers, people who care more about ideas than bloodlines. You will be introduced simply as my protégée, a young woman of education and refinement. Your past need not be discussed unless you choose to reveal it." The gala was held at a magnificent house in Grosvenor Square, its ballroom glittering with chandeliers and filled with the cream of London's progressive society. Rosalind wore a gown of ivory silk that Lady Agatha had commissioned, simple in design but exquisitely made. Her auburn hair was arranged in soft curls, and a single strand of pearls graced her neck. She looked, Lady Agatha assured her, like a young woman of quality and intelligence. They had been at the gala for perhaps an hour, Rosalind engaged in a fascinating conversation with a female author about the education of women, when a familiar voice cut through the pleasant hum of conversation. "Lady Agatha, how unexpected to see you at such a progressive gathering." Rosalind turned to find Duke Nathaniel Ashford standing behind them, Lady Charlotte Pembroke on his arm. The Duke looked as impeccable as ever in his evening clothes, but there was a tightness around his eyes that suggested he was not entirely comfortable. Lady Charlotte's expression was one of barely concealed triumph, her gaze sweeping over Rosalind with calculated disdain. "Your Grace, Lady Charlotte." Lady Agatha's tone was coolly polite. "I was not aware that either of you took an interest in educational reform." "We don't," Lady Charlotte said with a brittle laugh, "but one must make appearances at these tedious events. It's expected." Her eyes fixed on Rosalind. "And who is this? She looks remarkably familiar, though I cannot quite place her." "This is Miss Rosalind, my protégée," Lady Agatha said smoothly. "She has been staying with me this season." Recognition dawned in Lady Charlotte's eyes, followed by malicious delight. "Of course, the little maid from Ashford Manor. How extraordinary that you've managed to secure a patron, my dear. Though I suppose displaying a royal seal does open certain doors, even for those of humble origins." The nearby conversations faltered as people turned to listen. Rosalind felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, assessing, judging. The Duke had gone rigid, his jaw clenched. "Charlotte," he murmured, a warning in his tone. But Lady Charlotte was not finished. "Tell me, Miss Rosalind, have you discovered the truth about that seal yet? Or are you still clinging to fantasies of royal blood? Because I have made inquiries, you see, and I have learned some very interesting things about your mother, about her indiscretions." Rosalind felt the old fear rising, the instinct to make herself small, to apologize, to disappear. But then she remembered Lady Agatha's lessons, Dr. Reed's respect, the books she had read about women who refused to be diminished by society's cruelty. She lifted her chin and met Lady Charlotte's gaze directly. "My mother was a woman of honor and courage," she said clearly. "Whatever circumstances surrounded my birth, she protected me and raised me with love. I am not ashamed of her or of myself. Can you say the same, Lady Charlotte? Can you claim that your title and your wealth have made you a person of genuine worth? Or are they simply decorations covering an empty soul?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lady Charlotte's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing in speechless fury. The Duke's expression was unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been respect or perhaps regret. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner?" Lady Charlotte finally managed. "You are nothing, a servant playing dress-up, a bastard with delusions of grandeur." "That is enough." Dr. Reed's voice cut through the tension as he stepped forward to stand beside Rosalind. "Lady Charlotte, your behavior is disgraceful. Miss Rosalind has shown more grace and intelligence in 3 months than you have displayed in your entire life. I suggest you apologize or remove yourself from this gathering." "And who are you to give me orders?" Lady Charlotte sneered. "Some country doctor with pretensions? You are as much a nobody as she is." "I am a man who values character over pedigree," Dr. Reed replied calmly. "And I am not alone in that assessment." He gestured to the crowd around them, many of whom were nodding in agreement. "You have revealed yourself, Lady Charlotte, not as a lady of quality, but as a small-minded bully who cannot bear to see others rise above the station you have assigned them." Lady Westbrook herself, the hostess of the gala, swept forward. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, known for her sharp wit and her dedication to social reform. "Lady Charlotte, Dr. Reed is correct. Your conduct is unacceptable. I must ask you to leave my home immediately." "This is outrageous!" Lady Charlotte turned to the Duke. "Nathaniel, say something, defend me." But the Duke was staring at Rosalind, his expression complex and troubled. "You have changed," he said quietly. "You are not the frightened girl I knew at Ashford Manor." "No," Rosalind agreed. "I am not. I have learned that fear is a choice, and I choose differently now." For a long moment, they stood in tableau, the Duke and his furious fiancée, Rosalind flanked by Lady Agatha and Dr. Reed, the crowd of onlookers holding their collective breath. Then Lady Charlotte made a sound of pure rage and swept from the room, her silk skirts hissing across the floor. The Duke hesitated, then bowed stiffly and followed her. As the door closed behind them, conversation erupted. People crowded around Rosalind, offering congratulations and support. Lady Westbrook embraced her warmly. "My dear, you have just become the most talked-about young woman in London. I hope you are prepared for the attention." Dr. Reed remained at her side, his presence steady and reassuring. When the crowd finally dispersed and they found a quiet corner, he took her hand gently. "That was remarkably brave and remarkably foolish. You have made a powerful enemy." "I already had one," Rosalind replied. "At least now I have faced her openly, rather than cowering in fear." "True," he smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and wonderful. "Miss Rosalind, I wonder if I might call upon you tomorrow. There is something I would very much like to discuss with you, something personal." Her heart skipped. "I would like that very much, Dr. Reed." "Elias," he said softly. "Please call me Elias." That night, as Lady Agatha's carriage carried them home through the lamplit streets, the elderly woman patted Rosalind's hand. "You have crossed a threshold tonight, my dear. There is no going back to who you were. But I think you will find that moving forward is far more interesting than looking back." Rosalind gazed out at the city, at the lights and shadows and endless possibilities, and felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty exactly, but a quiet confidence that whatever came next, she would face it with her head held high and her spirit unbroken. Dr. Elias Reed called at Lady Agatha's townhouse the following afternoon, precisely at 3 o'clock. Rosalind received him in the drawing room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. Lady Agatha had made herself scarce, claiming a sudden need to visit her milliner, leaving them alone, with only the distant presence of servants as chaperone. Elias sat across from her, his usually confident demeanor replaced by an endearing nervousness. He cleared his throat twice before speaking. "Miss Rosalind, I have been thinking a great deal about what I witnessed last night. Your courage, your dignity in the face of cruelty. It only confirmed what I have come to believe over these past weeks." "And what is that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "That you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "I know that I have little to offer by society's standards. I am not wealthy. I have no title. My work takes me into the poorest parts of London, where I treat patients who can pay me nothing but gratitude. But I have a comfortable income, a house in Bloomsbury, and a profession that gives me purpose, and I have come to realize that none of it means anything without someone to share it with." Rosalind's breath caught. "Elias, I am asking you to marry me." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Not because of any seal or royal connection, not because Lady Agatha has made you presentable to society, but because you are intelligent and brave and kind. Because you see the world as it could be, rather than accepting it as it is. Because when I imagine my future, you are in every part of it." Tears pricked at Rosalind's eyes. "You know nothing of my true parentage. The seal suggests royal blood, but it could just as easily be a payment for my mother's silence about some scandal. I may be the daughter of a prince, or I may be the daughter of a stable hand. I don't know, and I may never know. I don't care." Elias moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I care about who you are, not where you came from. Will you marry me, Rosalind? Will you share your life with a doctor who keeps irregular hours and comes home smelling of carbolic acid?" She laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, gently and thoroughly, and Rosalind felt the last chains of her old life fall away. She was no longer a maid, no longer defined by service or fear. She was simply herself, choosing her own path, her own future. The engagement was announced the following week, causing a fresh wave of gossip throughout London society. Some praised the match as a romantic triumph of love over circumstance. Others sneered at the doctor who had married above his station and the mysterious girl who had ensnared him. Lady Charlotte Pembroke was said to be apoplectic with rage, though she and the Duke had retreated to his country estate and were no longer seen in town. Lady Agatha threw an engagement party that was attended by London's most progressive thinkers. Physicians and writers, reformers and artists, people who valued ideas over bloodlines. Rosalind moved through the crowd with growing confidence, discussing medical advances with Elias's colleagues, debating literature with published authors, feeling herself truly seen and valued for the first time in her life. A week before the wedding, a letter arrived from Ashford Manor. It was addressed to Rosalind in an elegant hand she did not recognize. Inside was a brief note from the Duke. "Miss Rosalind," it read, "I write to offer my congratulations on your engagement and to apologize once more for my behavior during your time in my employ. I have had occasion to reflect on my actions, and I'm ashamed of the man I was. You deserved better treatment, as did all those who served in my household. I am taking steps to reform my estate management and to treat my servants with the respect they deserve. I hope that you will find happiness in your new life and that you will accept this small gift as a token of my sincere regret." Enclosed was a bank draft for £500, a sum that made Rosalind gasp. It was more money than her mother would earn in 10 years of labour. Lady Agatha, reading over her shoulder, made a sound of approval. "He is learning. Perhaps there is hope for him yet, though I suspect Lady Charlotte will not be pleased with his newfound conscience." "Do you think they will marry?" Rosalind asked. "I think the Duke is beginning to realise that beauty and breeding are not the same as character. Whether he has the courage to break his engagement remains to be seen." Lady Agatha smiled. "But that is his journey, not yours. You have your own path to walk now." The wedding took place on a bright morning in May, in a small church in Bloomsbury. Rosalind wore a gown of cream silk, simple and elegant, with orange blossoms in her hair. Her mother travelled from the country to attend, and though they had much to discuss about the past, Rosalind found that she could not be angry. Her mother had done what she thought necessary to protect her daughter, and that was a gift beyond price. Lady Agatha stood as Rosalind's sponsor, beaming with pride. Dr. Reed's colleagues filled the pews, along with several of his patients from the charity hospital, scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes. It was not a fashionable wedding by society's standards, but it was filled with genuine warmth and joy. As Rosalind and Elias exchanged their vows, she glanced at the royal seal that now hung on a chain around her neck, no longer hidden but worn openly. It was a symbol of her past, yes, but also of her survival, her courage, her refusal to be defined by others' expectations. Whatever secrets it held about her birth, they mattered less than the life she was choosing now. After the ceremony, as they emerged into the sunlight to a shower of rice and cheers, Elias pulled her close. "Are you ready for this? A life of modest comfort, hard work, and service to those who need us most?" Rosalind smiled up at him, feeling more certain than she had ever felt about anything. "I have spent my entire life in service, but this time I choose it freely. This time it is mine." They climbed into the carriage that would take them to their new home in Bloomsbury, waving goodbye to the cheering crowd. As they pulled away, Rosalind caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the edge of the churchyard. The Duke, alone, watching from a distance. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and he inclined his head in what might have been respect, or farewell, or acknowledgement of how much had changed. Then the carriage turned the corner, and he was gone. 6 months after her wedding, Rosalind stood in the doorway of the clinic she and Elias had established in Whitechapel, watching the morning sun paint the narrow street in shades of gold and amber. The neighbourhood was poor, the buildings cramped and crumbling, but there was life here, resilience in the faces of the people who passed by on their way to work in the factories and warehouses. The clinic occupied the ground floor of a modest building with living quarters above. It was a far cry from the grandeur of Ashford Manor or even the comfortable elegance of Lady Agatha's townhouse, but Rosalind had never been happier. Each day brought new challenges, patients who could not pay, diseases that defied treatment, the constant struggle to secure supplies and funding. But it also brought purpose, the profound satisfaction of making a real difference in people's lives. She had discovered a talent for organization and management, skills honed during her years of service now applied to running the clinic efficiently. She kept meticulous records, managed their limited funds with careful precision, and had a gift for persuading wealthy donors to support their work. Lady Agatha had been their first patron, of course, but others had followed, impressed by Rosalind's passion and intelligence. Elias emerged from the examination room, wiping his hands on a towel. His face was tired but content. "Mrs. Patterson's fever has broken. I think she'll recover fully, thanks to your insistence that we keep her here for observation." "She had nowhere else to go," Rosalind replied. Her children needed their mother. It was the only choice. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," she teased. "I was beginning to worry." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the arrival of the morning post. Among the usual bills and correspondence was a letter bearing an impressive seal. Rosalind opened it with curiosity, then gasped. "What is it?" Elias asked. "It's from the palace, from the king's private secretary." She scanned the elegant script, her hands beginning to tremble. "They have completed their investigation into my parentage. They wish to meet with me next week to discuss the findings." Elias took her hand. "Do you want to know? We have built a good life here. Whatever they tell you, it won't change who you are." "I know." Rosalind folded the letter carefully. "But I think I need to know. Not for myself, but for any children we might have. They deserve to understand their full history." The meeting took place in a private office at St. James's Palace, a room lined with books and smelling of leather and old paper. The King's secretary, a distinguished gentleman named Sir William Hartwell, greeted them with grave courtesy. "Mrs. Reed, Dr. Reed, thank you for coming. I will be direct, as I suspect you prefer clarity to elaborate preambles." He opened a folder on his desk. "Your mother, Margaret, served Princess Charlotte faithfully until 1799. During that time, she attracted the attention of Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, the King's uncle. Their relationship was brief and by all accounts genuine on both sides. When your mother discovered she was with child, the prince could not acknowledge you publicly without causing a scandal that would damage the crown. Instead, he provided for your mother's security and gave her the royal seal as a guarantee of your protection." Rosalind felt the room spin slightly. Prince Edward, Duke of Kent. She was the granddaughter of King George III, cousin to the current king. It was almost too much to comprehend. "The prince died in 1820, Sir William continued, "but he left instructions that you were to be protected and provided for, should you ever need assistance. The current king, your cousin, wishes you to know that you have his support, though he understands if you prefer to maintain your privacy. There will be no public announcement unless you desire one." "I don't," Rosalind said immediately. "I have no wish to be part of the court, no desire for titles or recognition. I only wanted to know the truth." Sir William smiled. "His Majesty suspected as much. However, he has instructed me to establish a trust in your name, to ensure that you and your descendants will never want for security. The funds will be substantial, though not ostentatious. Enough to support your clinic and your work, with plenty remaining for your personal needs." Elias squeezed her hand. "That is extraordinarily generous." "It is the least the crown can do," Sir William replied. "Your mother protected a royal secret at great personal cost. You have honored her sacrifice by living a life of service and integrity. The king is pleased to support your continued work." As they left the palace and walked through the autumn streets back toward Bloomsbury, Rosalind felt a strange sense of completion. She knew now where she came from, understood the sacrifice her mother had made. But more importantly, she knew who she was, not a princess or a pauper, but a woman who had chosen her own path. News of the Duke of Ashford's broken engagement reached them a few weeks later. Lady Charlotte had apparently overplayed her hand, demanding that the Duke dismiss half his staff for imagined infractions. He had refused, and she had issued an ultimatum. He had chosen his principles over her beauty and connections, and she had left in a fury, immediately attaching herself to an elderly earl with a larger fortune and a weaker will. Lady Agatha, visiting the clinic with a basket of supplies, shared the gossip with evident satisfaction. "The Duke has become quite the reformer, apparently. He's improved wages for his servants, established a school for the village children, and is courting a sensible widow with 3 children and a sharp mind. I suspect he learned something from his encounter with you, my dear." "I hope so," Rosalind said. "Everyone deserves the chance to grow and change." Spoken like someone who has done exactly that. Lady Agatha surveyed the busy clinic, the patients waiting to be seen, the medicines carefully organized on the shelves. You have built something remarkable here, something that matters. We have built it, Rosalind corrected, gesturing to Elias, who was examining a child's injured arm with gentle competence. All of us together. That's what makes it strong. That evening, after the last patient had been treated and the clinic doors locked for the night, Rosalind and Elias climbed the stairs to their modest apartment. She moved to the window, looking out over the rooftops of Whitechapel toward the distant spires of Westminster. Somewhere in that direction lay the palace where her father had lived and died, the world of privilege and power that could have been hers. But she felt no regret for the path she had chosen. She had learned that true freedom was not found in wealth or status, but in the ability to choose one's own purpose. She had been a maid, a mystery, a bride, and now she was a healer, a partner, a woman who knew her own worth. Elias came to stand beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That I am exactly where I'm meant to be," she replied, leaning back against him. "That sometimes the greatest gift is not knowing where you'll end up, but having the courage to choose your own direction when the path reveals itself." "Profound and true," he murmured against her hair. "Though I might add that having someone to walk that path with you makes all the difference." She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "Then we are both fortunate indeed." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, full of struggle and hope, poverty and possibility. And in a small clinic in Whitechapel, a woman who had once been invisible had found her voice, her purpose, and her place in the world. Not because of a royal seal or a dramatic revelation, but because she had chosen to bloom exactly where she was planted, transforming her circumstances through courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in her own worth. The seal still hung around her neck, a reminder of secrets and sacrifices, but it no longer defined her. She was Rosalind Reed, physician's wife, clinic manager, and architect of her own destiny, and that was more than enough. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. I would love to know how far this tale has traveled.